I was 32 years old in the fall of 2014 when this happened. I remember the year clearly because my life was a mess in quiet ways. I had just taken a short contract job doing land inspection work for a small timber company, the kind of job where you drive out to places no one thinks about anymore. The cabin was in northern Idaho, far from any town name that would matter. Just dirt roads, old logging paths, and thick trees that blocked the sky. The cabin wasn't on any map I was given. I found it while checking boundary markers near a dried-up creek. I wasn't looking for shelter, but the weather turned fast that afternoon. Cold rain came down hard, and the wind pushed through the trees in long, steady waves. My truck couldn't go any farther, so I parked and walked the rest of the way with my pack. That's when I saw the cabin sitting back from the trail, half hidden behind pine trees and brush. It looked old but not abandoned in the way most forgotten places look. The roof was intact, no big holes. The windows were dirty but not broken. The door was shut, not hanging open. The ground around it was oddly clear, like someone had been walking around there recently. No deep weeds, no fallen branches left to rot. I told myself I would just wait out the rain. I wasn't planning to stay the night. I stepped onto the porch, and the boards creaked in a low, tired way. The smell hit me right away. Damp wood, old smoke, and something sour underneath it. Not rot, not garbage, just something human that had been there too long. The door wasn't locked. That should have bothered me more than it did. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin was one room, maybe 20 feet across. A small kitchen area, a table, a wood stove, and a narrow hallway leading to what looked like a bedroom. Everything was dusty but used. The table had a cup ring from a mug. The stove had ash inside that didn't look old. The bed had a thin blanket folded at the foot, not neatly, but not thrown there either. I stood still for a long time listening. No wind inside, no animals, just the rain hitting the roof and the slow ticking of cooling metal from the stove. I told myself someone must come here once in a while. Hunters, maybe. I decided to stay until the rain slowed. I took off my wet jacket and sat at the table. I didn't explore much at first. Something about the place made me want to stay in the open where I could see everything. After maybe 20 minutes, I noticed something small that I had missed. The chair across from me wasn't pushed in. It was pulled back slightly, angled toward the door, like someone had stood up from it recently. I felt a tight feeling in my chest, but I ignored it. People leave chairs like that all the time. The rain got heavier instead of lighter. Daylight started to fade faster than I expected. The trees outside made it darker earlier. I realized I might have to stay longer than planned. I checked my phone. No signal. I stood up and walked slowly toward the bedroom. The floorboards changed sound there, softer, more worn. The bedroom was small, barely big enough for the bed and a narrow dresser. On top of the dresser was a cracked mirror. It was wiped clean in the center, like someone had been using it often. There were long dark hairs stuck to the corner of the glass. Not a lot, but enough to notice. I backed out of the room and went back to the main area. That's when I noticed the smell again, stronger now that the room was warmer from my body heat. It reminded me of unwashed clothes and old skin. Not extreme, just constant. I didn't hear her come in. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the door open. I only noticed something was wrong when the light inside the cabin changed slightly, like a shadow passed where it shouldn't. I turned toward the door. She was standing just inside the doorway. She was a woman, maybe late 40s or early 50s. Hard to tell because her face was tight and worn. Her hair was long, dark, and messy, hanging down around her shoulders. Her clothes were layered and dirty, like she had been wearing the same things for a long time. A jacket too big for her frame, boots caked with dried mud. She wasn't looking at me at first. She was looking down at the floor, like she was counting something or checking where she stepped. My body froze, not fear like in movies, just a heavy stillness. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. She slowly lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were the worst part, not because they were crazy or wide, but because they were calm. Too calm, like I was something she had expected to see. She didn't speak. She didn't move closer. She just stood there, breathing slow, shoulders slightly hunched, hands hanging at her sides. I realized then that this was her place. Not a hunting cabin, not abandoned, hers. I took a step back without meaning to. The chair behind me scraped loudly against the floor. The sound echoed in the small room. She flinched at the noise, just a little, like an animal reacting to sudden movement. She took one step forward. That broke whatever hold I was under. I moved toward the window on the side of the cabin. I wasn't thinking about logic or manners, just space, distance. She stopped moving when I did. She tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to understand what I was doing. The air felt thick. The smell was stronger now. I noticed her hands were dirty, nails broken, skin cracked. There were faint scars on her wrists, old ones, not fresh. I kept my eyes on her while I moved sideways. I reached the window and realized it was nailed shut. Not boarded, just nailed. From the inside. That's when the fear really settled in. Slow and cold. She took another step. I backed away toward the door this time. My boot caught on the edge of the rug near the stove, and I stumbled. I didn't fall, but it was enough. She moved faster then. Not running, but quick, determined steps. I pushed past her, shoulder brushing her jacket. She smelled stronger up close, like sweat that never washed off. She made a low sound in her throat. Not a word, just air pushed out hard. I got the door open and ran. I didn't look back right away. I ran down the path toward my truck, slipping in the mud, branches hitting my face. My lungs burned. When I finally did look back, she was standing on the porch. She didn't chase me. She stood there watching, rain soaking her hair and clothes, face blank, eyes locked on me until the trees blocked my view. I got to my truck and drove until the road turned to gravel again and my hands stopped shaking enough to grip the wheel properly. I reported it the next day, but not in detail. I said there was someone living illegally on company land. They said they would look into it. A month later, I asked again. They said the cabin had been empty when they checked. No one there. No sign of recent use. I know what I saw. The ending doesn't come with flashing lights or answers. I finished my contract and never took another job like that again. Sometimes I think about that woman, still standing in the doorway after I left, watching the forest swallow me. Not angry, not scared, just waiting for the quiet to come back. That's the part that stays with me the most. I still remember that year clearly because it was the last time I ever stepped foot on that farm. It was 2014, late October, the kind of time when the air feels heavy and the days get shorter faster than you expect. I was 29 back then, working odd jobs and helping people fix fences, clear land, or watch property. A guy I barely knew owned an old farm a few hours away from town and asked me to stay out there for a couple weeks to keep an eye on things. He said people had been cutting through the land at night and stealing tools. The place had a small cabin near the edge of the fields where I could stay. It sounded simple, quiet, and honestly, I needed the money. The farm was bigger than I expected. Long, empty fields of dead corn stalks stretched out in every direction, broken only by rusted fencing and patches of woods that looked too thick to walk through easily. The cabin sat far from the main road, hidden behind a line of old trees that blocked most of the wind. It was a one-room wooden cabin with a small porch, tin roof, and a wood stove inside. The boards were gray and cracked from age, and the door didn't shut right unless you lifted it and slammed it hard. The first day felt normal enough. I unloaded my food, water, sleeping bag, and tools. There was no power, no phone signal, just quiet. The quiet felt good at first. I walked the property, checking fences and sheds. Most of the sheds were empty except for old oil cans, broken plows, and piles of rotten wood. I noticed footprints in the dirt near one of the barns, but I told myself they were old. Farmers, hunters, anyone could have made them. That night, the wind picked up. The cabin creaked in a way that made it sound alive, like it was stretching and settling with every gust. I cooked beans on the stove and ate slowly, listening to the sounds outside. Coyotes howled far away, then closer, then faded again. I locked the door and pushed a chair against it, more out of habit than fear. The second day, things started to feel off. I found fresh tire tracks near the far fence, deep enough that they hadn't been there long. I followed them until they disappeared into the woods where the ground got too soft to tell anything. I remember standing there, listening, realizing how far I was from anyone else. No roads, no houses, nothing but trees and open land. That evening, just before dark, I saw movement near the barn. I froze, watching. It was a person, or at least shaped like one. They were bent over, moving slowly, like they were dragging something heavy. I stayed still, heart pounding, waiting for them to look up. They didn't. After a minute, they disappeared behind the barn. I told myself it was probably the owner or someone checking equipment, but it didn't make sense. No vehicle, no lights, no sound except the dry scrape of something on dirt. I went back to the cabin and locked myself in again. That night, I heard footsteps around the cabin. Slow, careful steps crunching gravel and dry leaves. They circled the place once, then again. I held my breath, staring at the door. Whoever it was never knocked. They never tried the handle. They just walked, stopped, then walked some more. Eventually, the sounds faded. The next morning, I checked outside. Footprints were everywhere. Different sizes, different patterns, some deep, some light. They led toward the fields and into the woods. I felt watched the entire time I was outside, like eyes were on me from somewhere I couldn't see. By the fourth day, I barely slept. Every night there were noises. Sometimes it sounded like someone was in the barn. Other times it was close to the cabin, right outside the walls. I found scratches on the door one morning, long shallow lines in the wood, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. Not animal scratches, too straight, too deliberate. I started keeping my tools close, a crowbar by the bed, a flashlight always on. I stopped leaving the cabin unless it was full daylight. The quiet that I liked at first now felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. One afternoon, I walked farther than usual, checking the far edge of the property. Near the tree line, I found something that made my stomach drop, a shallow pit dug into the ground. Inside were old clothes, shoes, and what looked like a broken phone. Everything was dirty and damp, like it had been there a while. I didn't touch anything. I backed away slowly and returned to the cabin without looking back. That night was the worst. The footsteps came back, but this time they stopped right outside the door. I could hear breathing, slow, steady breathing, close enough that I knew someone was standing there. The door handle moved slightly, just enough to make the metal click. I stood there in the dark, holding the crowbar, shaking so bad my arms hurt. The breathing went on for a long time. Then I heard more footsteps, at least two people, maybe more. They walked away together, heading toward the barn. I waited until morning before moving. To first light, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't care about the job anymore. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to leave. As I loaded my truck, I noticed the barn door was open. Inside, the floor was torn up, dirt everywhere, like something had been buried and dug back out. There were blood stains, old and dark, soaked into the wood. I drove out fast, not stopping until I reached the main road. Later, I reported everything. The farm was searched weeks after that. They found illegal activity tied to the land, things people don't talk about openly. The cabin was torn down. The barn was burned. I never went back. Even now, years later, when I think about that place, I remember the quiet, the breathing at the door, and the feeling that I was never alone out there, not even for a second. I drove up to the cabin 2 years after my ex-husband died. It was late October, the kind of cold that feels dry and sharp, like it cuts through your clothes instead of sinking into them. The trees along the road were mostly bare, branches sticking up like thin fingers. I remember noticing how quiet everything felt once I turned off the main highway. No traffic noise, no distant town sounds. Just my tires on gravel and the low hum of the engine. The cabin sat on a piece of land he bought when we were still married. Northern part of the state, far enough out that phone service was bad and neighbors were miles away. He always liked places like that. I didn't. When we divorced, I never came back. After he passed, the lawyer said the property was still in both our names. It took a while to deal with the paperwork, and I kept putting it off. Eventually, I had to go up there to clean it out so it could be sold. I was 36 at the time. He would have been 42 if he hadn't died. Heart attack, sudden, alone in his apartment in the city. That's what I was told. We hadn't spoken in over a year before that. Still, driving towards something that had once been ours made my chest feel tight. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. One story, dark wood siding, a metal roof that had rusted in spots. The porch sagged a little in the middle. Leaves had piled up against the steps. I parked near the tree line and sat in the car for a minute, listening. No wind, no animals, nothing. Felt like the whole place was holding its breath. When I unlocked the door, the smell hit me right away. Old wood, dust, cold air that hadn't moved in months. Maybe longer. He hadn't been up here much toward the end. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The cabin was dim even in the daytime. Small windows, heavy curtains he never opened. I flicked the light switch near the door. Nothing happened. Power must have been shut off. I used my phone flashlight and walked slowly through the main room. The furniture was the same as when we split. A worn couch, a wooden table with scratches all over it, 2 chairs that didn't match. There were empty beer bottles lined up on a shelf near the kitchen area. Dust coated everything. I could see my footprints forming on the floor as I moved. I told myself I would stay calm and practical. Just clean, pack, and leave. I had planned to stay 1 night, maybe 2. I brought groceries, water, a sleeping bag, and a small generator that I left in the car. Even with all that planning, my stomach wouldn't settle. I started with the bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets stiff with age. His clothes were still in the dresser. Flannel shirts, jeans, socks rolled into balls. I pulled open the closet and found his old hunting jacket hanging there. When I touched it, a cloud of dust came off and made me cough. The smell was faint but familiar. I hadn't realized how much memory could sit in fabric. I worked for hours, packed boxes, threw out trash, wiped down surfaces. As the sun started to drop, the light inside the cabin shifted. Long shadows stretched across the floor, and corners of rooms seemed deeper than they had earlier. I turned on the generator outside and plugged in a single lamp. The low mechanical noise was oddly comforting. By the time it was fully dark, I was exhausted. I heated a can of soup on a small camping stove and ate standing up. The silence outside pressed in harder once night settled. Every sound inside the cabin felt louder. My own breathing, my footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. That's when I noticed something off. The back door, the one that led to the woods, was unlocked. I was sure I had checked all the doors when I arrived. I stood there staring at it, my hand resting on the cold metal handle. The lock wasn't broken, just unlocked. I locked it and tried to brush it off. Maybe I missed it earlier. Stress does that to your head. I told myself that while laying out my sleeping bag on the couch. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. No reason at first. Just that sudden alert feeling like your body knows something before your brain does. The generator was still running outside. The lamp cast a weak yellow glow. The cabin was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. Felt tighter. I listened carefully. First, nothing. Then I heard it. A soft sound from the back of the cabin. Not footsteps exactly. More like something brushing against the wall. Slow, uneven. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't move for a long time. The sound stopped. I waited, counting my breaths. Then it started again, closer this time. I grabbed the flashlight and stood up, my legs stiff and shaky. I checked the back door. Still locked. Windows looked fine. No movement outside that I could see. I told myself it was an animal. Deer maybe, or branches rubbing against the siding. I went back to the couch, but I didn't sleep again. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When daylight finally came, I felt embarrassed by how scared I'd been. Everything looked normal again. I made coffee on the stove and stepped outside to stretch. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in the dirt near the back of the cabin. Human footprints. Large, heavy impressions leading from the woods to the back wall, then circling the cabin before disappearing back into the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I crouched down and looked closer. They were fresh, made sometime during the night. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, trying to make sense of it. The area was remote, but not impossible to reach. Maybe someone knew the place was empty. Maybe someone had been watching. I should have left right then, packed my car and driven straight back to town. Instead, I went inside and locked every door again. I kept working, faster now, more frantic. I wanted it done. That afternoon, while clearing out a storage closet near the bathroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. A notebook. It wasn't mine. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Messy, pressed hard into the page. I flipped through it. Most of it was normal. Lists, expenses, notes about repairs. Then near the back, the writing changed. Shorter lines, repeated phrases, dates. He wrote about feeling watched when he stayed at the cabin, about hearing someone outside at night, about footprints that never matched his boots. The last entry was dated 3 years ago. He wrote that someone had been inside the cabin while he was gone. Things moved, doors unlocked. No signs of forced entry. He wrote that he started sleeping with a gun nearby. I closed the notebook with shaking hands. The cabin suddenly felt very small, very exposed. That night, I didn't bother with the generator. I packed everything into the car while there was still light. As I carried the last box out, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. I got into the car and locked the doors. Just as I turned the key, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shape between the trees. Person standing still. Too far away to see details, but close enough to know it wasn't an animal. I didn't wait. I drove straight down the gravel road, faster than I should have. I didn't look back. Weeks later, I reported everything to the local sheriff. They said they'd check the property. A month after that, I got a call. They found signs that someone had been using an old hunting shed about half a mile from the cabin. Food wrappers, bedding, footprints that matched the ones I saw. They never found the person. The cabin was sold as is. I never went back. Sometimes I think about how long someone might have been out there watching, waiting, how my ex-husband might not have been as alone as everyone thought, and how close I came to staying one more night. I was 34 that winter, and I had my dog with me, a thick-coated mixed breed named Rowan who had more sense than I did most days. This happened in late November of 2018, up in a stretch of forested hills a few hours from the nearest town. I had rented a small hunting cabin for a week because I needed quiet after a bad year. The cabin sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by pines and dead oak trees, with a creek cutting through the rocks about 50 yards downhill. The road in was gravel and barely wide enough for one truck. Once I parked, there was no traffic noise at all. Just wind, birds, and the sound of trees moving. The cabin was old but solid. One room, a small loft, a wood stove, and a porch that sagged in the middle. The windows were cloudy and scratched. The door stuck when I closed it, like the frame had shifted over time. Inside, everything smelled like dust, cold wood, and old smoke. There was a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves that held a few chipped plates and some rusted tools. No cell service, which I knew ahead of time. I brought a radio, extra food, and enough supplies to stay put even if it snowed. The first 2 days were quiet in a good way. I hiked with Rowan during the day and cooked simple meals at night. Rowan stayed close to me, always checking the tree line before settling down. He had a habit of stopping suddenly and lifting his nose, and I learned to watch him more than the woods. Nothing felt wrong at first. The forest felt empty, which I liked. On the 3rd evening, I noticed something small but off. When I came back from the creek, there were fresh boot prints in the mud near the porch. I told myself they could have been there before and I just missed them. The ground stayed damp in the shade, so prints lasted longer than I expected. Still, the shape was clear, deep heel, wide toe, not old. Rowan sniffed the ground and stayed stiff, tail low, eyes fixed on the trees. I pulled him inside and latched the door. I tried to shake it off and focus on the fire. That night, sleep came in pieces. The wind picked up after midnight, and branches scraped the roof. Rowan lifted his head every time a sound changed. Once, far off, there was a dull thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. I stayed still and listened until my ears rang. Nothing followed it. Eventually, I slept again. The next morning, I found more signs. The woodpile beside the cabin had been disturbed. A few logs were rolled away, and the bark was wet where hands had touched it. I had stacked them neatly when I arrived. I walked a slow circle around the cabin and saw drag marks leading into the trees, faint but fresh. They were not animal tracks. They were straight lines, uneven, like something heavy had been pulled across leaves and dirt. Rowan growled low in his chest and refused to follow them. I told myself it could be someone else renting a nearby cabin or a hunter passing through. But there were no other cabins close enough, and it was late for hunting season in that area. The feeling in my stomach tightened, the kind you get when your body knows something before your mind accepts it. I stayed close to the cabin that day. I kept the radio on low and cleaned the place more than it needed. Rowan stayed pressed against my leg whenever I moved. Around late afternoon, I noticed one of the windows had a smear on it, like a hand had brushed the glass from the outside. It was at shoulder height. The glass was cold, and the smear was newer than the dust around it. As it got dark, the woods felt closer. The trees blocked the sky, and the valley filled with shadow early. I locked the door and slid a chair under the handle even though it felt pointless. The fire popped and hissed. Rowan sat facing the door, ears forward, not blinking much. Every now and then, he would turn his head toward the window, then back again. Sometime after midnight, there was movement outside. Not loud, not sudden. Just the soft, careful sound of steps on leaves. They stopped near the porch. I held my breath and listened. Rowan's body went rigid, a low vibration running through him. The steps moved slowly, circling the cabin. I heard a light scrape against the wall, like fingers or fabric brushing wood. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it would give me away. The steps paused at the door. There was pressure against it, gentle at first, testing. The latch held. I stayed still, every muscle tight, my hand resting on Rowan's collar to keep him quiet. The pressure stopped. The steps moved away, then faded into the trees. I did not sleep after that. When morning came, the ground around the cabin was marked with clear footprints. One set, adult size. They went around the cabin twice, then led toward the creek. Near the tree line, there was a spot where the ground was torn up, like something had been dropped or set down hard. I did not follow them. I packed my bag instead. Before I could leave, I realized something else. My truck keys were gone. I searched the cabin, every pocket, every shelf. I knew where I had put them, on the table by the door. They were not there. My chest went tight and my hands shook. I checked the ground outside. No keys. No sign of them at all. I made a decision then to wait until daylight fully settled and then walk out with Rowan. The road was long, but it led to a ranger station about 8 miles away. I packed what I could carry, locked the cabin, and started up the road. Rowan stayed close, glancing back often. We had gone less than a mile when Rowan stopped dead. Ahead, in the middle of the road, were my keys. They were placed neatly on a flat rock. Clean, dry, like someone wanted me to see them. I did not touch them right away. I scanned the trees, the ditches, every place someone could hide. The woods were silent in a way that felt heavy. I picked up the keys and turned back. I did not want to walk the road knowing someone was close enough to watch me. Back at the cabin, I unlocked the door and went inside. Nothing looked disturbed, but the air felt wrong, like it had been held too long. That night was the worst. The sounds came closer than before. Slow steps on the porch, a long pause, then the sound of breathing, faint but real, coming through the thin wood of the door. I smelled sweat and dirt. Rowan stood between me and the door, teeth bared, silent. The handle moved slightly, just enough to make the metal click. Then a heavy weight leaned against the door, steady and patient. I stayed where I was until my legs burned. Time stretched. Finally, the weight lifted. The steps moved away, not hurried. I waited until the first gray light of morning before moving. At dawn, I found deep marks in the door where something had pressed hard. I loaded Rowan into the truck and drove without stopping. When I reached the ranger station, my hands were still shaking. The investigation later was simple and clear. A man with a history of living off-grid had been camping illegally near the creek. He had watched the cabin for weeks, waiting for someone alone. He took the keys to keep me there, planning to come back when he thought I would be weaker and scared enough to make a mistake. Rangers found his camp, his tracks, and evidence tying him to other break-ins. He was arrested 2 days later. I never went back to that cabin. The fear did not come from the woods or the dark. It came from knowing how quiet and careful another person could be, and how close I came to not leaving at all. Rowan still sleeps near the door now, even years later. When he lifts his head at night, I listen. I was 29 years old in the fall of 2016 when I drove up into the northern woods alone. The place was far enough from any town that my phone lost signal about 40 minutes before I reached the dirt road. I had been there once before with a coworker years earlier, but this time I wanted the quiet. I told myself it was about hunting season, about getting away from work and noise, but the truth was I needed to clear my head. The cabin wasn't mine. It belonged to a friend of a friend who barely used it anymore. He warned me it was old, that it had problems, that it hadn't been checked on in a long time. I didn't care. Old didn't scare me. The road into the woods was narrow and full of ruts. Branches scraped the sides of my truck the deeper I went. The trees were tall and packed together so tight that the daylight felt dim even in the afternoon. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than I remembered. It sat in a clearing that had mostly grown back in. Tall weeds and saplings crowded the walls. The wood siding was gray and cracked, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. There was a small shed behind it that leaned to one side, half swallowed by brush. I parked and sat in the truck for a minute, listening. No wind, no birds, just silence so thick it made my ears ring. I grabbed my bag, my rifle, and walked up to the porch. The boards creaked under my boots. The door was unlocked, like it always had been. Inside, the air smelled like damp wood, old dust, and something sour I couldn't place. I opened the shutters to let in light. The cabin had one main room, a small table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the wall, and a wood stove with a pipe running through the ceiling. Everything was covered in a thin layer of grime. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning just enough to feel comfortable. I swept the floor, wiped the table, checked the stove. The water came from a hand pump outside, and it still worked, though the water ran brown at first. By the time the sun started to dip, I had a fire going and some canned food warming on the stove. The light outside faded fast, and the woods pressed in close to the windows. I locked the door out of habit, even though I knew no one else should be anywhere near this place. That first night was quiet but uneasy. Every sound carried. The fire popped. The cabin settled. Somewhere far off, something moved through brush, slow and heavy. I told myself it was a deer or maybe a bear. That was normal. I lay on the bed fully dressed, boots by my side, rifle leaning against the wall within reach. Sleep came in short pieces. The next morning was cold and gray. I stepped outside just after sunrise and saw fresh tracks in the mud near the pump. Bootprints. Not mine. They were larger, deeper, and headed toward the tree line. I stood there staring at them longer than I should have. The rational part of my mind went through explanations. Another hunter, someone passing through. The woods were public land miles out, but still people wandered. I followed the prints a short distance until they vanished into leaves and hard ground. I didn't like how close they were to the cabin. I spent the day moving through the woods, checking game trails, trying to focus on why I was there. The forest felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Too quiet, no distant shots, no voices, just my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I found an old trail camera nailed to a tree not far from the cabin. It wasn't mine. The casing was sun-bleached, the lens cracked. When I opened it, there was no memory card inside. That bothered me more than it should have. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in and the light dropped again. I headed back early. When the cabin came into view, I stopped. The door was open. I knew I had closed it. I stood still, listening, scanning the clearing. Nothing moved. Slowly, I approached. Inside, the air was colder. The table had been shifted slightly. One of the chairs was tipped over. Nothing was stolen, but something had been touched. Someone had been there. I checked every corner, the shed, the woods around the clearing. No one. I locked the door and pushed the table against it. That night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark, listening. Hours passed. Then I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate. They circled the cabin once. Leaves crunched close to the walls. I held my breath, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The steps stopped near the window. I waited for glass to break or the door to rattle. Nothing happened. After a long time, the steps moved away. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I found more boot prints. Fresh, closer. They went around the cabin to the shed, back toward the trees. I packed my things, telling myself I would leave after one more look around, just to be sure. I followed the tracks deeper than I should have. The woods grew thicker, darker. After about half a mile, I found something that made my stomach drop. A makeshift camp. A tarp strung low between trees, a pile of empty food cans, old clothes, and bones picked clean. Deer, maybe, maybe not. I didn't stay to study them. I turned back fast, every sense on edge. Halfway back, I realized the forest felt different. Sounds were gone again. Then I heard movement behind me. Not running, walking, matching my pace. I didn't look back. I kept going until the clearing broke through the trees. The cabin was waiting, silent and still. I threw my gear inside and slammed the door. I didn't care about hunting anymore. I was leaving. As I stepped off the porch, I saw movement at the edge of the trees. A shape half hidden, tall, still, watching. I raised my rifle but couldn't see enough to aim. The shape didn't move. I backed away to my truck, never turning my back. When I reached it, my hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys. The engine started on the second try. As I drove away, I glanced in the mirror. The clearing was empty again, like nothing had ever been there. The drive out felt endless. Every shadow looked like someone stepping onto the road. When I finally hit pavement and my phone buzzed with signal, I didn't stop driving. I went straight home. Weeks later, I reported the camp to local authorities. They told me they'd look into it. Months passed. I never heard back. I never went back to that cabin. I sold most of my hunting gear not long after. Even now, years later, I still think about that place. About how close someone was while I slept. About how the woods can hide people just as easily as animals. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts. Just isolation and someone living out there who didn't want to be seen. That knowledge sits heavier with me than any made-up story ever could. I was 28 when this happened, in late October of 2016. I had taken a few days off work and driven north to a wooded area outside a small town most people pass without noticing. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend, someone I barely knew, but I had the key and permission to use it. It sat deep in state land, surrounded by thick trees and uneven ground. No neighbors, no cell service. That was the point. I wanted quiet. I wanted to reset my head. The drive in took longer than expected. The dirt road was narrow and torn up from old rain. Branches scraped the sides of my truck. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was already low, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like dark fingers. The cabin looked smaller than the photos. One room, a short porch, tin roof, and a single window facing the trees. The wood siding was faded and cracked. It had been there a long time. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled old and dry, like dust and wood that had soaked up years of cold. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a small wood stove. Everything was simple and worn. I dropped my bag and took a slow look around. Nothing felt wrong at first, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I spent the first hour cleaning a bit, wiping dust, opening the window and setting my things down. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in waves. Leaves scraped against each other. Somewhere far off, something heavy moved through the brush. I told myself it was a deer. That made sense. This area was full of them. As night came, the temperature dropped fast. I lit the stove and cooked a basic meal. The light inside the cabin was weak, coming from a single lantern hanging from a hook. Shadows stayed thick in the corners. I kept glancing at the window without really knowing why. I felt watched, but I pushed that thought away. Being alone does that to your mind. Around 10, I locked the door and lay down on the bed. The mattress was thin and creaked when I shifted. The fire popped softly in the stove. Outside, the wind slowed, then stopped. That sudden stillness made the forest feel frozen. I stared at the ceiling, counting the dark lines in the wood. That was when I heard footsteps. First, they were far away, slow, heavy, not rushed. The sound came from behind the cabin, crunching over leaves and small sticks. I stayed still, listening. My heart picked up speed. I told myself it was an animal, but the steps didn't match that. They were too even, too careful. The footsteps stopped near the side wall. I could hear breathing then, low and steady, close enough that it made my chest tighten. Whoever or whatever it was stayed there for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't even blink much. The lantern flickered slightly, throwing the shadow of the window frame back and forth. After what felt like forever, the steps moved again. This time they went toward the front of the cabin. I heard the porch boards creak under weight. The sound was slow, deliberate, like the person was testing each step. My hands were shaking. I reached for the flashlight beside the bed but stopped halfway. I didn't want to make noise. There was a soft scraping sound near the door. Not knocking, more like fingers or something dragging lightly across the wood. Then it stopped. I lay there for hours. I don't know exactly how long. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a light, broken sleep. I woke up just before dawn. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to embers. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then I saw the door. The door was slightly open. I knew for a fact I had locked it. I always double-check locks. It's a habit. The latch was still in place, but the door itself had been forced just enough to break the frame slightly. Thin cracks ran through the old wood. I stood up slowly and grabbed the flashlight. My legs felt weak. I walked to the door and pushed it closed. Outside, the ground near the porch was disturbed. Leaves were pushed aside. There were footprints, large ones, human. They led around the side of the cabin and into the trees. I felt sick. Someone had been there. Someone had tried to get in. I spent the morning tense and alert. I packed my things but didn't leave right away. Part of me didn't want to panic. I told myself maybe it was someone lost, maybe a hunter. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain the careful steps or the way they stayed so close for so long. Around noon, I heard movement again. This time it was closer, faster, branches snapping, leaves being crushed. I looked out the window and saw nothing at first. Then I noticed the shape between the trees. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes that blended into the forest. He stood still, facing the cabin. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew he was looking at me. I stepped back from the window. My heart hammered in my ears. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and the flashlight. I didn't bother being quiet anymore. I just wanted out. As I reached the door, I heard him moving again, faster now, circling. I could hear his steps on the other side of the wall. He wasn't hiding anymore. I yanked the door open and ran. The truck was about 30 yards away. The ground was uneven, and I nearly fell twice. Behind me, I heard heavy running. No words, no shouting, just breath and movement. I reached the truck, threw the door open, and jumped inside. My hands slipped on the keys as I tried to start it. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. As I looked up, I saw him at the edge of the clearing. He stopped there, just watching. His face was still hard to make out, but his posture was relaxed. Too relaxed, like he knew something I didn't. I slammed the truck into gear and sped down the dirt road. Branches slapped the sides again. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement miles later. I went straight to the nearest town and called the police. They took my report seriously and went out to the cabin with me later that day. They found signs of someone staying nearby. A small hidden spot in the woods with trash, old food cans, and a dirty blanket. Whoever it was had been there for a while. They never found him. I didn't go back to that cabin again. I gave the key back and told them to burn the place down for all I cared. For months after, I slept with the lights on. Every sound outside my apartment made my stomach twist. What scared me most wasn't the chase or the footprints. It was the patience. The way he moved slowly in the dark. The way he stayed silent. The way he stood there watching as I drove away, like he knew the forest would always give him another chance. I learned something out there. Some places are quiet not because they are empty, but because someone else already knows how to stay hidden. I was 27 when this happened, and it was the fall of 2016. I still remember the exact smell of the air that day, cold and wet like rusted metal and dead leaves. I had been driving through a rural part of northern Michigan, far away from main roads, following an old map I found online that marked forgotten logging routes. I liked places like that back then. Empty land, no people, just woods that felt untouched. I thought it would calm my head. My truck barely fit the road. Branches scraped the sides, and the tires rolled over thick mud that looked like it had not been disturbed in years. I had to stop twice to move fallen branches out of the way. There was no cell service, but I didn't care. I had told myself it would just be a short look around before heading back. That was when I saw the cabin. It sat deep in the trees, maybe 40 yards off the road, half hidden by pine and brush. First, I thought it was just a pile of old boards. Then the shape became clear. A roof slanted inward. One corner collapsed. The wood was gray and swollen from years of rain. The windows were gone, only dark square holes left behind. The place looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. I don't know why I stopped. Curiosity always gets me into trouble. I parked the truck and stepped out. The forest was quiet in a way that made my ears feel full. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots pressing into wet ground. The closer I got, the worse it felt. The cabin had no signs posted, no fencing, no clear trail leading to it. That alone should have told me something. People usually don't abandon places this far out unless they want them gone. The front door was still there, hanging crooked on one hinge. I pushed it gently, and it opened without a sound. That bothered me more than a loud creak would have. Inside, the air smelled old and heavy, like mold and rot mixed with something sour. The floorboards were uneven, and I tested each step before putting weight down. Light came through the open windows in weak gray lines. Dust floated everywhere. The place had one main room, a small back room, and what looked like a storage space or pantry. There was a table tipped on its side, a broken chair, and an old iron stove covered in rust. Nothing about it felt staged. This wasn't a movie set. This was real neglect. I noticed marks on the walls almost right away. Long scratches, deep enough to dig into the wood. They ran in uneven lines, some vertical, some slanted. I tried to tell myself it was just animals. Bears, maybe. But bears don't scratch walls indoors like that. The floor had stains. Dark ones. Some spread out, others pooled. They were old, but not ancient. I crouched down and touched one with the tip of my glove. Flaked slightly, then smeared. I stood back up fast, my heart beating harder than it should have. In the back room, there was a mattress on the floor. No fram, no seats, just a bare, stained mattress with deep indentations, like someone had been sleeping on it recently. The air back there was worse, stronger. It made my eyes sting. That's when I heard something outside. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunch like a foot pressing into leaves. I froze. I told myself it could be a deer or a raccoon, but the sound came again, slower this time and closer to the cabin. I moved to the window and looked out. First, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement between the trees, a shape shifting slightly like someone leaning to get a better look. I couldn't make out a face, but I could tell it was standing upright. Too still, too controlled. My chest tightened. I stepped back from the window, careful not to make noise. I didn't want to panic, but my body already was. Every instinct told me I wasn't alone out there, and whoever it was knew I was inside. I checked the front door, still open. I thought about running for the truck, but the trees were thick, and I had no idea where the person was now. Running blind felt worse than staying still. Another sound came from the side of the cabin, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate. Something brushed against the outer wall, making the boards creak slightly. My hands shook as I picked up a piece of broken wood from the floor. It was useless, but it made me feel less empty. I moved back to the main room and stayed near the center, watching the windows. Shadows shifted outside, blocking light for a second at a time. Whoever it was moved carefully, staying out of full view. That scared me more than anything else. Animals don't do that. I smelled smoke suddenly, faint but real. Not old smoke, fresh. My stomach dropped. Someone was close enough to light something, and close enough for the smell to reach me. I didn't wait anymore. I moved fast toward the door and stepped outside. The air felt colder immediately. I scanned left and right. Nothing. Then I heard breathing behind me. Low, controlled, human. I ran. I didn't look back. I crashed through brush, scraped my arms, nearly fell twice. My lungs burned, and my heart felt like it would tear itself apart. When I reached the truck, I jumped in and locked the doors without thinking. I slammed it into reverse and backed up hard, hitting branches and rocks, not caring about damage. As I pulled forward onto the road, I finally looked in the mirror. Someone stood where the cabin was. A man, thin, dirty clothes. He didn't chase me. He just watched. His posture was calm, like he had expected this to end that way. I drove for nearly an hour before I stopped shaking. I reported the cabin later to local authorities, gave them the location as best I could. They said they would look into it. Weeks passed. Nothing came of it. No follow-up. No call. Years later, I looked it up again. Satellite images showed nothing where the cabin had been. Just trees, like it never existed. I still think about the scratches on the walls, the mattress, the way that man stood there, not angry, not rushed, just patient. Like I had walked into his space, not the other way around. I don't explore abandoned places anymore. Some things aren't empty just because they look that way. I went to the cabin in late October of 2016, the kind of time when the air feels thin and sharp and the trees look tired. The place sat far out from the nearest town, tucked into a stretch of mixed pine and dead hardwoods in northern Idaho. I was 28 back then, working odd jobs and needing time away from people. I brought my dog with me, a big mixed breed I had rescued years earlier. He was heavy-boned, dark-coated, quiet, and alert in a way that always made me feel safer than I probably deserved to feel. The cabin was old but solid, built sometime in the 1950s. One room, a small loft, a wood stove, and a porch that sagged a little on the left side. The windows were thick glass with scratches that caught the light wrong. The woods around it were dense enough that even during the day the light came in dull and green. The dirt road that led there was barely a road anymore, just two worn lines through weeds and stones. Once I parked and shut the truck off, the quiet felt heavy, like it had weight to it. The first day was normal enough. I unloaded supplies, checked the stovepipe, stacked firewood, and walked the perimeter with my dog trailing close to my leg. He kept his head low, sniffing the ground more than usual, stopping at certain spots longer than I expected. I noticed old marks on a few trees, shallow cuts like someone had dragged metal across bark years ago. There were also signs of animals, deer tracks mostly, and something heavier near the creek behind the cabin. I told myself it was probably a bear passing through earlier in the season. That night, the quiet felt different. Not loud, Not broken, just wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The wind barely moved the trees, but I kept waking up thinking I heard something outside. My dog stayed awake most of the night. I could tell by the way his body stayed tense and how he never fully laid down. Every time I drifted off, I would wake to him shifting or staring at the door. The stove popped softly, the only normal sound in the place. Over the next few days, small things started to feel off. I found muddy boot prints near the side of the cabin, half washed by rain but fresh enough to still have edges. They were not mine. The road was too rough for casual hikers, and the nearest hunting season had ended weeks earlier. I checked my truck every morning and evening. Nothing was missing, but the feeling that someone had been close stayed with me. My dog started acting different too. He stopped wandering far from the cabin. When I took him down toward the creek, he would freeze and refuse to go any farther, hair lifting along his back. He would stare into the trees, not moving, not making noise, just locked in place. I trusted him more than my own instincts, so I stopped pushing it. One afternoon, while cutting wood, I found something behind the shed that made my stomach tighten. It was a pile of bones, cleaned too well to be natural. Not scattered like animals leave them, but stacked loosely together. Small animals mostly. I didn't touch them. I just stood there, listening to my own breathing, feeling watched without seeing anything. That night was the worst so far. I heard movement around the cabin after dark, slow and careful. Footsteps, not rushed, not heavy. They circled the place once, maybe twice. My dog stood rigid near the door, low growl in his chest, ears flat. I kept the lights off and didn't move. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, holding my breath every time the sound came close to a window. Nothing tried to get in. After a long time, the sound stopped. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the porch railing and more footprints. Closer this time. They went up to the windows and stopped. Whoever or whatever it was had stood there for a while. I packed a bag that morning, telling myself I would leave the next day if things didn't settle. I didn't want to admit how scared I was. That afternoon, fog rolled in thick and low. It swallowed the trees and made the woods feel smaller, tighter. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. My dog refused to leave the cabin at all. When I stepped onto the porch to look around, the fog seemed to press in on me. Sounds didn't travel right. I could hear something moving again, closer than before, but I couldn't see it. As evening came, I locked the door and closed the shutters. I kept the stove low and sat near it, my dog pressed against my leg. The sense of being watched was constant now, like a pressure behind my eyes. I heard breathing outside at one point, slow and steady, close enough that it sounded like it was right on the other side of the wall. Then I heard scraping along the logs, deliberate and patient. At some point in the night, the sounds changed. Something hit the side of the cabin once, hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Then again, not random, not panicked, controlled. I stayed still, every muscle tight, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. My dog didn't bark. He just stayed pressed against me, trembling but silent. Near dawn, the sounds finally stopped. The fog lifted with the morning light, slow and thin. I waited until the sun was fully up before opening the door. Outside, the ground was torn up. Deep tracks led away from the cabin toward the creek, mixed with human footprints. Whatever had been there had left in a hurry at the end, the tracks uneven and chaotic. That was enough. I loaded the truck as fast as I could. I didn't clean. I didn't check anything else. I kept my head down and my dog close. As I drove away, I saw movement at the edge of the trees near the road. I didn't slow down. I didn't look long enough to understand what I was seeing. I reported the incident days later to a local ranger station, leaving out most of the details. They told me there had been reports of illegal squatters and poachers in the area for years, people living rough and avoiding contact. They suggested I was lucky nothing worse happened. I never went back to that cabin. I sold the land later without stepping foot on it again. Even now, years later, I still remember the feeling of those nights, the heavy quiet, the slow footsteps, and the way my dog knew something was wrong long before I did. He still reacts to certain woods the same way, stopping short, refusing to move forward. Whatever was out there didn't feel like an animal, and it didn't feel like someone just passing through. Felt patient, felt curious, and it felt like if I had stayed one more night, the ending would have been very different. I was 29 years old when this happened, and it took place in late October of 2014. I still remember the exact smell of the air that week, damp leaves mixed with cold dirt, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and doesn't leave. I had rented a small, old maintenance cabin on private land outside a rural town in western Pennsylvania. The listing didn't mention much, just that it was quiet, isolated, and cheap. What it didn't clearly explain was how close it sat to an old graveyard. The cabin was originally built in the 1950s and used by groundskeepers back when the land was actively maintained. By the time I rented it, the place had been forgotten for decades. The road leading to it was barely a road at all, just a narrow strip of gravel and dirt cutting through trees that had grown too close together. Branches scraped along the sides of my truck as I drove in, and fallen leaves hid potholes deep enough to jolt my teeth. I arrived just before sunset. The sky was already turning dull gray, and the trees blocked most of the remaining light. When I parked and stepped out, the quiet hit me hard. No distant traffic, no voices, not even birds. Just the sound of my boots crunching on leaves and the faint creaking of trees swaying in the wind. The cabin itself looked worse than the pictures. The wood siding was faded and warped, with dark stains near the bottom where moisture had soaked in over the years. The windows were small and cloudy, and the front porch sagged slightly when I stepped onto it. Inside, the air smelled old and stale, like dust and mold that had been sealed in for too long. There was a small table, a metal bed frame with a thin mattress, a wood stove, and a few shelves with nothing on them. No electricity, no running water. I had brought lanterns, bottled water, and food, thinking I'd spend a few quiet days alone. It wasn't until I went back outside to grab more things from my truck that I noticed the graveyard. It sat about 100 yards behind the cabin, partially hidden by trees and tall weeds. The headstones were uneven and worn, many of them tilted or sunk into the ground. Some were so old the names were barely readable. Iron fencing surrounded parts of it, bent and broken in places, swallowed by vines. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at it, feeling a strange pressure in my chest. Not fear exactly, just discomfort, like I was standing somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. I lit the lanterns and the wood stove, trying to make the place feel less empty. The light barely pushed back the darkness inside the cabin, leaving the corners thick with shadow. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees and making the graveyard fence creak faintly. Every now and then, I heard what sounded like footsteps on leaves, but I told myself it was just animals moving through the woods. I went to bed early, wrapped in layers of blankets, listening to the stove pop and crack. Sleep came in pieces. I kept waking up for no clear reason, my heart already racing. Around 2 in the morning, I woke again and noticed something was different. The sounds outside had stopped. No wind, no rustling, nothing. The silence felt heavy, almost loud. Then I heard a dull thump. It came from behind the cabin, slow and uneven, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. It wasn't steady. Thump, pause, thump, pause. I lay there staring at the ceiling, holding my breath. The sound moved closer, then stopped. A few seconds later, something scraped lightly against the side of the cabin, just once. I didn't move. I didn't reach for a weapon or a flashlight. I just lay there, every muscle tight, listening. After a long minute, the sound faded back into the trees. Eventually, the wind returned, and I convinced myself I had imagined it. Exhaustion finally pulled me back under. The next morning, I stepped outside and immediately saw marks in the dirt near the back wall of the cabin. Long, shallow grooves, like something heavy had been pulled across the ground. Leaves were disturbed, crushed down in a messy path that led toward the graveyard. I followed it halfway before stopping. The air felt colder there, and the ground seemed softer, almost muddy, even though it hadn't rained. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself. I walked the property, chopped wood, cooked food, but I couldn't stop looking toward the graveyard. Every time the wind shifted, the trees seemed to lean in that direction, like they were pointing. That night, I made sure the door was locked and pushed the table against it. I told myself I was being cautious, not scared. Still, I kept the lanterns lit longer than necessary. When I finally lay down, I kept my boots on. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a new sound. Slow footsteps on the porch. The wood creaked under weight that didn't shift or pace. Just stood there. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I stared at the door, waiting for the handle to move. Didn't. Instead, something brushed against the outside wall again, this time higher up, followed by a faint scratching sound. I stayed awake for hours, barely breathing. The footsteps eventually faded, moving away toward the graveyard. When morning came, I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. Outside, I found fresh footprints in the dirt near the porch. They were uneven and deep, like the person had been limping or dragging one foot. They didn't come from the road. They came from the direction of the graveyard and went right back toward it. I packed my things that afternoon. I told myself I'd leave as soon as the sun dipped lower, just enough light to see the road. As I carried my last bag to the truck, I noticed something else. One of the headstones closest to the cabin looked different. The dirt around it was disturbed, darker, like it had been dug up and pressed back down recently. I didn't go any closer. As I started the truck, I caught movement in the trees near the edge of the graveyard. A shape partially hidden, hunched and still. It didn't wave or chase or rush toward me. It just stood there, watching. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline of a person wearing clothes that hung loose and stiff, like they'd been buried in them. I drove away faster than I should have, not stopping until I hit the main road. I didn't look back. Weeks later, I tried to find information about the land. Old records showed that the graveyard was for a small settlement that collapsed in the early 1900s after disease and poverty wiped most of it out. The cabin had been used by caretakers, then abandoned. There were mentions of grave robbing incidents in the area during the 1930s and 1940s. People stealing valuables, bodies being disturbed. One report mentioned a man who lived off the land near the cemetery and disappeared after being accused of digging up graves. I don't know who or what was out there those nights. I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't think anything supernatural happened. I believe I encountered someone who had been living near that graveyard for a long time. Someone broken and hidden from the world. Someone who saw the cabin as part of their territory. The dragging sounds, the uneven footprints, the watching from the trees all fit that explanation. What scares me isn't the idea of something unreal. It's knowing that I slept a few feet away from a real person who had no reason to let me feel safe, and who had already crossed the line of disturbing the dead. I never went back, and I never rent places that claim to be quiet and isolated anymore. Some places are quiet because no one is meant to stay there for long. I became a park ranger in my late 20s, around 2016. after years of wanting a job that kept me outside and away from crowded places. By the time this happened, I was 34 and had already seen enough bad things to know that the woods do not care about people. This took place in a large state forest in the northern part of the country, far from cities, where the trees grew tight and the ground stayed damp most of the year. The area had old logging roads, abandoned cabins from decades ago, and miles of land where no one went unless they had a reason. The call came in early October. A hiker had gone missing almost a week earlier. His car was found parked crooked near a closed trailhead, dusted with pine needles like it had been sitting there longer than it should have. No signs of struggle around the vehicle, no note, no clear direction of where he went. Search teams had already covered the main trails. Dogs had been brought in but lost the scent near a stream swollen from recent rain. By the 5th day, the search narrowed to the backcountry where old cabins were scattered from the logging era. Most were falling apart, unsafe, and officially off-limits. I was assigned to help check one of those cabins, sitting deep in a low valley where fog collected in the mornings and never fully burned off. I had passed that cabin many times before and never liked it. The roof sagged on one side, and the windows were black holes even in daylight. The trees around it were tall and close, blocking wind and sound. It always felt like the air there was thicker. We started the hike before sunrise. The forest was quiet in that way that feels wrong, like something holding its breath. The ground was soft, my boots sinking slightly with every step. I kept my eyes on the trail, watching for broken branches, disturbed leaves, anything out of place. The deeper we went, the older everything felt. Fallen logs were half swallowed by moss. Rusted scraps of metal from old equipment poked out of the dirt. About an hour in, I noticed signs that someone had passed through recently. A snapped twig that was still pale inside. A footprint near the edge of the trail, partly washed away by rain but not old enough to be from months ago. My chest tightened as I followed the signs off the trail toward the valley. The cabin came into view slowly, revealed through the trees. It looked worse up close. Parts of the porch had collapsed, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. The smell reached me before I even stepped onto the clearing. It was faint at first, easy to confuse with rot and wet leaves, but it was wrong. I had smelled it before on other calls, and my body recognized it even when my mind tried to deny it. I moved carefully, circling the cabin instead of going straight in. The windows were broken, glass scattered and dull with age. Inside, the floorboards looked dark in places, soaked from years of rain leaking through the roof. There were old cans on a shelf, their labels long gone, and a rusted bed frame shoved against one wall. The silence inside felt heavy, pressing against my ears. Near the back of the cabin, I saw drag marks in the dirt leading toward a small storage shed that leaned like it might fall over at any moment. The ground there was disturbed, leaves scraped aside in a way that did not match animal movement. My heart started to pound harder, not from fear of something unseen, but from the certainty of what I was about to find. The shed door was closed, held shut by a length of wire twisted tight. I paused for a moment, taking in the details. Fresh scratches on the wood, mud smeared near the handle, flies gathering despite the cold air. I untwisted the wire slowly, each movement loud in the quiet forest, and pulled the door open. The smell hit me fully then, thick and unmistakable. Inside, on the dirt floor, was the body of the missing hiker. He was face down, his clothes torn and soaked dark. One leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. His backpack lay nearby, emptied, its contents scattered like someone had gone through it in a hurry. The skin on his hands was pale, fingers stiff and curled slightly into the dirt. I forced myself to focus on details instead of the shock. His boots were muddy, matching the prints I had seen earlier. There were deep bruises on his arms and back, not from a single fall but from multiple impacts. The back of his head showed a wound that looked like it came from hitting something hard and sharp, maybe the edge of a rock or old metal. There were no signs of animals feeding on him, which meant he had not been there long, at least not long enough for the forest to do what it always does. I stepped back out of the shed, breathing through my mouth to keep from gagging. The trees around me looked the same as they always did, tall and unmoved, as if nothing had changed. I marked the area and waited for the next steps, standing guard while the hours dragged on. The sky stayed gray, and a cold drizzle started to fall, making everything slick and miserable. As the investigation moved forward, more details came together. The hiker had not been alone. Footprints around the cabin showed at least one other person's boots, heavier and more worn. There were signs of a struggle near the stream where the dogs lost the scent. It became clear that the cabin was not a random stop but a destination. Someone knew it was there and knew no one would hear anything that happened inside. Days later, after careful searching, another camp was found farther up the ridge. It was hidden well, with a tarp stretched low between trees and a fire pit dug deep into the ground to hide smoke. Items belonging to the hiker were found there, along with things that did not belong to him. Tools, rope, food wrappers, and a jacket with a name written inside that did not match the victim. The man responsible was caught weeks later, stopped during a traffic check in a nearby county. He had been living off and on in the forest for years, moving between old structures, avoiding attention. He admitted to meeting the hiker by chance, following him, and attacking him when an argument turned physical. There was nothing dramatic about it. No bigger reason, just anger, fear, and a place remote enough to think he could get away with it. I returned to that cabin once more after everything was finished. It was scheduled to be torn down, deemed too dangerous to leave standing. The shed was empty now, cleaned and cleared, the dirt floor disturbed and bare. The smell was gone, replaced by damp wood and mold. Standing there, I felt no sense of relief, only a deep tiredness. The forest did not feel different after that. The trails stayed quiet. The fog still settled in the valley every morning. But I knew what had happened there, and that knowledge stayed with me. Every time I pass an abandoned structure now, I look longer than I used to. I notice the ground, the way leaves are moved, the small signs people leave behind without realizing it. The ending of that search was clear and final. A man was found, identified, and laid to rest. Another man was taken into custody and sentenced for what he did. The cabin was destroyed, the land slowly returning to the forest. Nothing was left unfinished, yet the weight of it never fully lifted. It became another quiet reminder that the most frightening things in places like that are not made up stories or shadows in the trees, but real people and real choices, hidden by distance and silence until it is too late. I was 36 years old in the fall of 2013 when I rented the cabin. It sat alone in the northern part of Idaho, miles away from the nearest town, at the edge of a long stretch of logging land that had mostly been abandoned after the mills shut down. I chose it because it was cheap, because I needed quiet, and because I thought being alone would help me reset my head after a long year of stress and bad sleep. I told myself I would stay for 2 weeks, maybe longer if things felt right. The road leading to the cabin was a thin dirt strip carved between trees that grew so close together their branches touched above it. Pine needles covered the ground so thick the tires barely made sound. The farther I drove, the more cut off I felt. My phone lost service about 10 miles back, and the radio turned to static. I remember thinking how still everything looked, like the forest was holding its breath. The cabin itself was old but standing. Dark logs, small windows, a metal roof patched with different shades of rust. It sat in a clearing with tall grass that hadn't been cut in years. Behind it was dense forest. In front of it was nothing but trees and a dry creek bed. No other buildings, no power lines, just silence and the smell of damp wood. Inside, it was basic. One room with a small kitchen area, a wooden table, a bed against the far wall, and a cast iron stove. Dust coated everything. There were old footprints in the dirt near the door, half faded, like someone had been in and out months ago. I noticed them but didn't think much of it. Cabins like this got checked sometimes by landowners or hunters. The first 2 days were quiet. Too quiet, but I told myself that was the point. I chopped wood, cooked simple meals, and slept more than I had in months. At night, the forest made normal sounds. Wind in the trees, distant animals, branches cracking under weight. Nothing unusual. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of something heavy moving outside. Not fast, not running, just slow steps in the grass near the cabin. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening. The steps circled the cabin once. I could tell because the sound shifted from one side to the other, stopping near the window, then near the door. I waited for it to leave. After a while, it did. The next morning, I found fresh footprints in the grass. They were large, uneven, and deep, like whoever made them carried weight or moved badly. They didn't look like deer tracks. They didn't look like any animal I recognized. They looked human, but off. The heel dragged, the toes dug in too deep. I felt uneasy, but again, I told myself it was probably a hunter or someone passing through. I decided to ignore it. That night, the sounds came back, this time closer. I heard something brush against the cabin wall, slow and deliberate, like a hand or shoulder dragging along the logs. The metal stove popped as it cooled, and every small noise made my heart jump. I stayed awake until morning. Over the next few days, things changed. Small things at first, objects not where I left them. The axe moved from where I leaned it against the wall. A chair angled slightly when I knew I had pushed it in. Once, I found the door unlocked when I was certain I had locked it. I started marking things in my head, double-checking, trying to catch myself making mistakes. But the pattern kept growing. I began to feel watched, not in a dramatic way, just a constant pressure, like eyes on my back when I stepped outside. The forest felt tighter, darker, even during the day. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, felt like warning. On the 7th night, I smelled smoke that wasn't from my stove. Came from outside, faint but real. I stepped to the window and saw a thin trail rising from the trees near the creek. Someone had a fire burning. Not a campfire. It was too low and hidden. Whoever it was didn't want to be seen. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I packed my things with the intention of leaving. As I carried bags to my car, I noticed scratches on the back of the cabin. Long, deep marks in the wood, vertical, like someone had tried to dig through the logs with tools or bare hands. Some of the wood was splintered. These weren't old. The edges were fresh. When I opened my car door, I saw something on the driver's seat. Mud. Wet mud shaped like a handprint. My chest tightened. I stood there for a long time, listening, waiting for movement. Nothing happened. The forest stayed still. I cleaned the seat, loaded the car, and tried to start the engine. It wouldn't turn over. I spent the rest of the day trying to fix it. The battery was dead. I had no signal, no tools that could help. I was stuck. That night was the worst. It started after dark. Slow footsteps again, but closer than ever. They stopped right outside the door. I could hear breathing, heavy, uneven breathing. The door handle moved slightly, just enough to make the metal click. Then something pressed against the door, hard enough to make the hinges creak. I sat on the bed with a knife in my hand, barely breathing. The pressure stayed for a long time. Minutes felt like hours. Then it stopped. The steps moved away, slow and dragging back toward the trees. I didn't move until morning. When the sun came up, I found the door scratched deep around the handle, wood chipped away, long marks running downward, as if whoever tried couldn't get in and lost patience. I knew then that leaving was my only option, even if I had to walk. I packed a backpack with food, water, and a flashlight. I left the rest. I locked the cabin and started down the dirt road on foot. The forest felt wrong, too quiet again. I kept checking behind me. About 2 miles in, I saw something ahead. A shape standing just off the road between the trees. Tall, thin. It didn't move. It didn't try to hide. It just stood there watching. I didn't wait to understand what I was looking at. I turned and ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. I didn't stop until I reached a clearing where I could see far in every direction. I stayed there until hours later when I finally heard an engine. A logging truck passed on a distant road. I followed the sound until I reached it. The driver took me to town. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. A week later, I reported what happened to the landowner. They went out to the cabin with local authorities. They found signs of someone living in the woods nearby. A crude shelter, old clothes, tools, evidence of someone watching the cabin for a long time. They never found the person. The cabin was shut down after that. The road was blocked. The listing disappeared. I still think about that place, about how long I was watched before I noticed, about how close I came to staying one more night. What scares me the most isn't what I saw at the end. It's the idea that someone had been there the whole time, learning my routine, waiting, patient, quiet, real. I don't go into remote places anymore. I don't trust silence the way I used to. Some places aren't empty just because no one answers when you call out. I was 37 that fall in the year 2014 when I took a week off work and drove north into the backside of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I picked a place that barely showed up on a map, a stretch of state forest cut up by old logging roads and shallow lakes that smelled like wet leaves and rusted metal. I wanted quiet more than comfort. I wanted a place where my phone showed no bars and the nights came fast and heavy. The cabin I rented sat alone near a narrow creek, built sometime in the late 1950s, according to the handwritten note left on the kitchen table. The note said the power was solar, the water came from a hand pump, and the lock sometimes stuck when it got cold. The drive in took longer than expected. The paved road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to something closer to a scar through the trees. I scraped the bottom of my car twice and shut off the radio to listen for anything wrong with the engine. The woods pressed close on both sides, tall pines mixed with bare hardwoods. It was late October. The ground was soft with rot and rain. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than the photos. One story, dark wood, tin roof spotted with orange rust. A narrow porch leaned forward like it was tired. Inside, the air smelled old but clean enough. Dust sat on every flat surface, but no mold. The floorboards creaked under my weight. There was a small wood stove, a sagging couch, a table with 2 chairs, and a single bedroom with a thin mattress. I unpacked slow, checked the corners, opened cabinets. Nothing unexpected. No signs of animals. No trash. The windows were small and cloudy, but they shut tight. I felt calm in that first hour, the kind of calm that comes from knowing no one else was around. The first night went quiet. I cooked Ken's soup, washed the pot in cold water, and went to bed early. The woods outside stayed still, no wind, no rain. I slept deep and woke before dawn, my body confused by the dark. I lay there listening. The only sound was the soft tick of the stove cooling and my own breath. When the sun came up, pale and weak, I made coffee and stepped onto the porch. The creek ran slow and brown. The trees stood close, their tops cutting the sky into sharp pieces. That morning, I noticed the first strange thing. In the mud near the edge of the creek, there were footprints that didn't belong to any animal I knew. They looked human, but wrong in shape, wider in the heel, the toes dragged. They came from the tree line and stopped near the water, then turned back the same way. I stood there a long time, telling myself they were old, maybe from a hunter earlier in the season. Still, the mud was wet. The edges were sharp. I spent the day hiking the nearby trails, staying close to the cabin without meaning to. The forest felt thicker than it should have. Sound didn't travel far. My own steps seemed loud, then gone too fast. Once, I found a pile of broken branches stacked against a tree, waist high, like someone had cleared a path and left the mess in one place. There were no fresh tire tracks anywhere, no signs of a camp. By late afternoon, the sky went gray, and a cold rain started without warning. That night, the wind came up. It moved through the trees in long waves, bending them just enough to make noise without breaking anything. I fed the stove and sat at the table, writing in a notebook by lantern light. Around midnight, I heard something hit the side of the cabin. Not hard, just a dull knock, then another closer to the back. I froze, listening. The wind could throw branches, I told myself. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I went to bed, though sleep came in short pieces. On the second day, I found the door unlocked when I woke up. I was sure I had locked it. The handle still stuck, just like the note said it would. I checked inside. Nothing moved, nothing missing. Still, the air felt different, like the cabin had been opened for a while. I walked the perimeter and saw fresh marks in the dirt near the back wall. Shoe prints this time, clearer than the ones by the creek. They circled the cabin once, slow, then stopped near the bedroom window. I thought about leaving. The thought came fast and strong, like a push. I stood there with my car keys in my hand for a long time. Then I felt foolish. No one had touched me. No one had come inside. I told myself I was letting the quiet get to me. I stayed. That afternoon, I drove farther down one of the logging roads, just to see where it went. After a mile, I found an old trailer sunk into the ground, half collapsed, surrounded by junk, rusted tools, broken chairs, empty cans. No recent signs of life, but the place felt watched. I turned around and went back to the cabin, my chest tight the whole way. The third night was the worst. The wind died, and the woods went silent again. I woke sometime after 2 with the feeling that someone was close. Not inside, but near. I lay still, eyes open, listening so hard my ears hurt. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, careful steps, the boards creaking under weight. They moved from one end to the other, then stopped right outside the front door. I held my breath. The handle moved once, just enough to test it. Then nothing. After a long time, the steps moved away back into the trees. I didn't sleep again. When morning came, I packed my things fast. Outside, the ground was marked with fresh prints all around the cabin, deeper than before, like the person had stood still for a while. Near the porch, I found something else. A piece of cloth, dark blue, caught on a nail under the steps. It looked like it had been torn from a jacket. I loaded the car and started down the road. Halfway out, I saw movement ahead. A man stood in the road, thin, dirty, wearing mismatched clothes that looked too big for him. His face was turned down, hair hanging in his eyes. He didn't move as I slowed. I stopped the car, my heart pounding. He stepped aside without looking at me, disappearing into the trees. I drove past, hands shaking, not stopping until I reached pavement. Later, after I was home, I called the county sheriff and told them everything. Weeks passed. I heard nothing. Then a short article appeared in a local paper online. A man had been arrested for breaking into remote cabins in the area. He had been living in the woods for years, watching places, learning patterns, waiting until people were asleep or gone. The article mentioned he liked to walk around cabins at night, testing doors, leaving signs. It said he was caught after someone reported fresh tracks and a piece of torn clothing. I never went back to that cabin. I still think about how close I came to staying one more night, how easy it would have been for him to pick the lock or force a window. The woods didn't feel evil or cursed. They were just empty enough for someone else to hide in them, close enough to watch, patient enough to wait. That's what scares me the most. Not something unreal, but the simple fact that I wasn't as alone as I thought, and that the silence was never really empty at all. I was 32 when this happened, and it was late October of 2018. I remember the year clearly because it was the last time I ever went anywhere alone like that. I drove north into a stretch of state forest that sat far from any real town. The kind of place with narrow roads, no cell signal, and miles of trees that all looked the same. I had rented a small hunting cabin for a few nights because I wanted quiet and space. I was tired of people, tired of noise, and I thought being alone in the woods would reset my head. The cabin was old but solid. One room, a small porch, a wood stove, and a metal roof that popped when the temperature dropped. It sat in a clearing that looked like it had been cut out of the forest by hand decades ago. The trees around it were tall and close together, mostly pine and fir, with branches that blocked a lot of light even during the day. The ground was soft with needles and damp leaves. There was no fence, no other buildings, just a thin trail that led back to the road about a mile away. The first day felt normal. Too quiet, but normal. I unpacked, stacked firewood, and checked the locks on the door and windows. Everything worked, though the locks were old. That night, the woods felt heavier. The wind moved through the trees in slow waves, and the sounds carried farther than they should have. I heard animals moving, small ones mostly, and something larger farther out. That did not bother me. What bothered me was how often the sounds stopped suddenly, like everything froze at once. I slept badly and woke before dawn. The air inside the cabin smelled like cold wood and ash. When I stepped outside, I noticed tracks near the porch. At first I thought they were deer prints, but they looked wrong. Too deep in some places, uneven, like something heavy shifted its weight in an odd way. There were also human footprints mixed in, but barefoot. That made no sense in that cold. I told myself someone must have been messing around before I arrived. I covered the tracks by walking over them and went back inside. The second night is when things started to feel wrong in a way I could not explain away easily. I was lying on the narrow bed, listening to the stove crackle, when I heard movement close to the cabin. Not fast, not loud. Slow steps. I waited for the sound to fade, but it didn't. It circled the cabin once, close enough that I could hear leaves pressing down under weight. I stayed still and focused on breathing. After a while, the steps moved away. Later that night, I heard something that sounded like a person moving through the trees. Not talking, not calling out, just the rhythm of steps that were too even to be an animal. They stopped behind the cabin and stayed there for a long time. I stared at the wall, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion. The third day was gray and cold. Clouds hung low and the forest looked flat and colorless. I walked the area around the cabin again and found more tracks. Barefoot prints, leading from the trees to the back of the cabin and then away again. Some of them overlapped animal tracks, like someone had stepped exactly where an animal had stepped earlier. The idea made my stomach tighten. I locked myself inside and stayed there most of the day. That evening, as the light faded, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was a deer standing still, but then it shifted and the shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. It stood just inside the trees, half hidden by shadow. I could not see a face clearly, just a pale shape where a face should be, and dark shapes hanging from its shoulders. It did not move like an animal. It did not move like a normal person either. Its posture looked forced, like it was copying something it had seen but never fully learned. I closed the curtains and locked the door again, even though it was already locked. I told myself it was just someone wearing gear, maybe a hunter or someone living rough in the woods. That explanation felt thin, but it was all I had. That night was the worst. I woke to heavy movement on the porch. The boards creaked under weight, slow and careful. Whatever was out there knew how to move quietly. I lay still, eyes open, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. The movement stopped at the door. I heard something brush against the wood, like fabric or hair dragging across it. Then nothing. Minutes passed, then hours. I did not sleep again. Just before sunrise, I heard movement retreat into the trees. When the light finally came, I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands shook so badly I dropped things. When I stepped outside, I saw marks on the door. Long scratches, uneven, not deep enough to be claws, more like fingernails scraping wood. There were also smears of mud and something darker, like dried blood. I did not check the rest of the area. I walked straight down the trail toward the road. Halfway there, I heard something following me. It stayed just out of sight, matching my pace. I did not turn around. I kept walking, faster and faster, until the trees thinned and I could see my car. I reached the road and drove until I had signal. I reported everything to local authorities. Days later, they told me they found a man living deep in the forest, miles from the cabin. He had been wearing animal hides and scraps of clothing. He had been barefoot. He had a history of living off the grid and avoiding people. They said he liked to watch cabins and imitate sounds to scare people away so he could stay hidden. They did not use the word skinwalker. That was a word my mind supplied on its own, trying to label something that felt wrong on a deep level. What I experienced did not need anything supernatural to be terrifying. It was a human being who had broken away from normal behavior so completely that he moved and acted like something else. I never went back to that forest. The cabin was later torn down. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about how close that man stood to me in the dark, how carefully he moved, how much time he spent watching before I ever noticed him. The scariest part was not what he looked like. It was the fact that he was real, that he was human, and that he knew exactly how to make himself seem like something that should not exist. I was 36 that year, late October of 2014, when I decided to spend a week alone at a small woodsman's cabin I owned far out in the countryside. The place sat near the edge of a long stretch of state forest, miles away from the nearest town. The land used to belong to an old logging family, and the cabin had been standing since the late 1970s. It was solid, rough, and plain. No electricity from the grid, just a small generator. No running water, only a hand pump outside and rain barrels. I liked it because it forced me to slow down. I brought my dog with me, a medium-sized mutt with sharp ears and a habit of watching the woods longer than I ever could. The drive-in was quiet. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then to dirt. Trees leaned in closer the farther I went, their leaves already brown and brittle. The air smelled like wet soil and dead plants. When I parked near the cabin, everything felt still in a way that made my ears ring. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic. Just silence and the low ticking sound of my engine cooling down. My dog jumped out and sniffed the ground, tail low, slow steps, like he was already trying to read something I couldn't see. The cabin was exactly how I left it months before. One room, a small loft, a wood stove, a table made from thick planks, and shelves lined with tools. Axes, saws, old traps I never used anymore, and nails sorted into jars. Outside, the woods stretched out unevenly, with patches of thick brush and areas where the trees thinned out into open ground. There was an old logging trail behind the cabin that curved away into the forest. It had not been used in years, but you could still see the ruts pressed into the dirt. The first day passed without anything strange. I chopped wood, checked the roof, cleaned out old mouse nests, and cooked simple food. My dog stayed close, always circling before settling down, always getting up to look toward the tree line. I told myself it was just the new smells. By nightfall, the temperature dropped fast. The woods darkened into a solid wall beyond the cabin windows. I locked the door, loaded the stove, and lay down on the narrow bed with my boots close by. Sometime after midnight, I woke up for no clear reason. The fire had burned low, and the cabin felt colder. My dog was standing, stiff and alert, facing the door. His ears were straight up. He wasn't growling or barking. That bothered me more than noise would have. I listened hard, holding my breath, trying to catch anything over the sound of my own pulse. First, there was nothing. Then I heard slow movement outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sound of weight shifting on damp leaves. Came from close to the cabin, then stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. My dog didn't move. The sound started again, this time closer to the sidewall, followed by a dull scrape, like something brushing against the logs. I stayed still. Eventually, the noise faded back into the woods. When morning came, I stepped outside and walked around the cabin. I saw disturbed leaves near the wall and a deep footprint pressed into the soft ground. It wasn't an animal track I recognized. It looked like a boot, large and worn with a flat heel. I told myself someone had wandered too close. Hunters passed through these woods sometimes. Still, it didn't sit right. No vehicle tracks. No reason to approach a cabin in the middle of the night and circle it quietly. I decided to stay alert but not panic. I had tools, a rifle, and experience in the woods. I wasn't helpless. Over the next 2 days, small things started to feel off. Tools I left in one place were not where I remembered them. A bucket near the pump was tipped over when I knew I left it upright. The logging trail behind the cabin showed fresh marks, pressed leaves, and snapped twigs, like someone had walked it recently. My dog followed those marks often, nose low, then stopped and stared into the trees with his body tense. On the fourth evening, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. One of my spare fuel cans, which I kept hidden behind a stack of cut wood, was gone. I searched the area, moving slowly, scanning the woods. About 50 yards away, just off the trail, I found it lying on its side, empty. No animal would drag it that far or open it. Someone had taken it, used it, and left it behind. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept the rifle within reach. My dog lay pressed against my leg, shaking slightly whenever a branch snapped outside. The woods felt closer than before, like they were leaning in. Around dawn, I heard movement again, heavier this time. Came from behind the cabin, near the trail. I stayed inside until the light was strong enough to see clearly. Later that day, I followed the trail cautiously. About a quarter mile in, I found a clearing I had never noticed before. In the center was a rough shelter made from branches, plastic sheeting, and scraps of fabric. Inside were empty food cans, dirty clothes, and a stained sleeping bag. Someone had been living there, watching the area, watching my cabin. The shelter faced directly toward my property. I backed away slowly and returned to the cabin. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. This wasn't a passing hunter. This was someone who knew the woods well and had been there for a while. I packed my essentials quickly. As I loaded my truck, my dog stood facing the trees, hackles raised, eyes locked on a spot just beyond the edge of the clearing. That was when I saw him. A man stood partially hidden behind a tree, dirty and thin, wearing a jacket that looked decades old. His beard was long and uneven. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. He didn't move forward. He didn't run. He just watched. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I got in the truck and drove away fast, gravel spraying behind me. I reported everything to the local authorities once I reached town. They took it seriously. Rangers went out the next day. They found the shelter, more supplies, and signs that the man had fled deeper into the forest. Weeks later, I heard he had been caught miles away, living off stolen goods, breaking into remote cabins. He had a history of violence and had been avoiding people for years. I never went back to that cabin alone again. Eventually, I sold the land. Even now, years later, I still remember how quiet those woods felt and how being watched can feel heavier than any sound. The scariest part wasn't the man himself. It was knowing how long he had been there, so close, without me ever realizing it.